Check one, two, three. Hey everybody, it's Michael Helms, also known as Michael the Sound Guy, and this is the Location Sound Podcast. You know, each episode we talk with location sound mixers, boom ops, and other industry pros about the various aspects of recording sound on location, whether it's for feature and independent films, TV commercials, interviews, any time where dialogue from actors is recorded. I started my career in the recording studios in New York City with some of the big artists back in the day, and later on projects for networks like HBO, Sci-Fi Channel, and the Cartoon Network. As time went by, I got out of the studio and began working in production sound. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or just starting out, thanks for joining us. All right, my guest today has worked on everything from feature films and TV to low-budget shorts. He's been a mixer, boom operator, and utility, and he's based out of Massachusetts. Please welcome Jack Garrett.
Hi, glad to be here.
All right, Jack, now we always start the show by asking, when you're mixing on set, what is in your audio bag? So tell us about your mics, your mixer, power distribution, and everything in between.
Okay, so my mixer is a Sound Devices 633. For wireless, I use Lectrosonics. I've got a 411A and a SRC receiver, and I have a couple SMQVs and an SMV with COS-11s. And then for mics, I've got MKH50 and the Schoeps CMC MK41. And then I also have a Sennheiser 416 and the Super CMIT Schoeps mic. For battery, I got the new Audio Root stuff, the batteries, and I just got the new, the little power controller thing. I had kind of soldered together my own that didn't have any controls, but it was working for me. But you know, I was like, I better go legit and get the actual BDS system for it. And it's nice, got lots of blinking lights and tells me exactly how much time I have left on the battery, which I really like.
All right. So what kind of timecode boxes do you like to use?
So I have the Mozegear TIG. I picked that one because, well, it was cheap at the time, and they made a version that had a BNC out. And I liked BNC because I try to make as many of my own cables as I can. And BNC is a lot easier than the LEMO connectors to put together. So been using that. For interviews and stuff, I have a breakaway cable that just sends it direct to the camera without having to use a sync box.
What kind of bag do you put all that in?
I have the Orca OR30. I actually got that fairly recently too. I was using a little porta-brace bag. I think it might have been one meant for a 302 or maybe a 702, but the 633 just barely fit in there, and it was really small. I liked it because I could really squeeze into tight spots with it. When I knew I had to add some more wireless receivers and such, I realized I was going to have to get something bigger.
Now, do you have the Orca harness as well?
No, I actually had another harness before. It's a petrol. My harness is a petrol harness.
All right. Well, let's jump right in on some of these projects you've worked on. Let's talk about the TV show that you did for AMC called, is it Nosferatu?
Yeah. So I have told people about that several times. It's you kind of have to explain it. It's based on a novel by Stephen King's son, and it's basically meant to be a vanity plate. So yeah, you pronounce it as Nosferatu, but it's spelled N-O-S number 4 A number 2.
All right. So tell us a little bit about, are you able to discuss what that project was all about and what's going on?
Well, I don't know if I can get into too many details. I mean, the book is out there, so I'm sure I didn't read the book, unfortunately, so I don't know how the show compares to the book. But as the utility on that, most of what I do is putting lav mics on the actors, and I also do the timecode sync boxes and hand out Comtac headsets for the people. And
was there a lot of physicality in there? So were you miking up actors that were very physical? Or
I'd say it was pretty rare that there'd be a scene where there were stunts and also dialogue. So most of the time, if they were doing stunts, they were not wearing a lav mic. I would say my default would be to not put a lav mic on someone who was doing any kind of falling or an action scene, just because I'm not worried about the mic packs. The mixer on Nosferatu also used Lectrosonics like I do, and I think those are just, they can really take a beating. So I'd never be worried about the mic pack. What I'm worried about is that the mic pack might hurt the actor if they fall on it or something. Nosferatu was a union shoot. I've only been in the union here for a little over a year. And so I'm kind of starting, it's weird, I'm sort of like starting over. In the non-union world, I'd been mixer and in charge of departments and stuff, but now that I'm in the union, I'm working on bigger projects, but I'm starting kind of at the low end. So it's kind of interesting to be back there in a way.
Tell us a little bit about, for some people that may not know what utility does on set, kind of give us a typical, or I know every day is not typical, but give us an example day of what your responsibilities are.
So basically, on a bigger shoot, a sound department is typically 3 guys. You have the mixer, getting all the channels from everybody, and he's making a mix for the dailies and recording everything. And he's got a cart with all his gear on it. Then you have the boom op. The boom op kind of stays on set and kind of gets a sense of what's going on, and they let the rest of the department know, like, here's what's coming up, here's the people that probably are going to need to wear a lav. That was actually really interesting to see on this show, how often you don't have to put lavs on everybody. When I'd been doing a lot of the low budget stuff, and for the most part, it was just me, just a one-man band, I pretty much had to put lavs on everybody all the time because I never really knew what they were gonna throw at me. And it was nice to see on the bigger things, sometimes you can say, hey, this is easy to boom. We don't need to put lavs on people. We know it's not gonna sound good, or we know the boom's always gonna sound better. And so that was nice. And of course, the boom op holds the boom. And then the third person on there is the utility, and that's what I did. And so basically, beginning of the day, I show up. I've got a separate cart that they call the follow cart, and it's kind of got all the stuff that I need, which is the lav mics. It's got Comtex or IFBs and the headsets. It's going to have the timecode boxes. And I roll that off the truck. And the first thing usually in the day is I get the sync boxes out and get them on the cameras and get them synced up. So the cameras are running the same time code as the mixer. Then I'm handing out Comtex, and then usually by then the actors are ready if they need to be laved, that I'm prepping those and getting them on actors if they need them.
Any particular challenges that you faced on this project?
I'd say one of the big challenges on this shoot in particular was we ran until January, and I think we were very fortunate that it didn't get extremely cold. We were still outside in like 30 to 40 degree weather, and there was rain, a little bit of snow. And I think it was interesting. I ended up purchasing several new items of clothing just for that shoot because I just knew it was going to be bad, and some of the other people who were there had some good recommendations for me. But another fun thing was I ended up buying a heating pad for the lav transmitter packs. I just felt too guilty putting a freezing cold, because, the Lectrosonics transmitters would stay on the truck and it wasn't heated overnight. So when we'd start in the morning, they'd be freezing cold. And no one really likes to have a freezing cold metal object up against their skin first thing in the morning. So I would try to get those on the heating pad and get them warming up before I had to put them on anybody.
When does that come out? Is that probably next year? Or?
I think it might be coming out this summer. I'm not sure. And the actors on it were really nice. They were great to work with.
Now, I noticed there was another project you worked on, and I saw in your bio, it was mixed at Soundtrack New York, and I actually worked at Soundtrack New York many years ago, and but it was called The Witch in the Window. Tell us a little bit about that project.
Well, I know a lot of times you ask people what was their favorite production that they worked on, or favorite experience on set. And I have to say, overall, that was probably the most fun I've had on a film set was that movie. And I think that was a combination of the crew being really fun and it being a really good experience, and also the story of that movie. I still haven't seen it. It's just coming out now. It's been in some festivals. But I'm really excited to see this one, actually. I think it's going to be a really cool story. But that one was filmed up in Vermont. We are like way out near Middlebury. The producers put us up basically in a camp on a lake because it was a bit off season, so there was no one else there. And that was great. You know, in the weekends, we would go out in canoes in the lake. We'd have a fire every weekend, and that was really fun. And then most of the film was shot in this one old house. It was a kind of a character piece, and there were really two major actors for the bulk of the whole film, so it wasn't super difficult as far as sound, because the house was really quiet. That was a very nice thing about it. Not, you know, you don't always get a really good location, and this was, you know, it was out in the country. The house was pretty old, so it didn't really have any modern appliances that I needed to worry about shutting off. I'd say the biggest challenge was that a lot of the dialogue was whispered. So it was like a father and son talking very quietly to each other, and the young actor, as soon as they would call cut, would start like dancing around and yelling, and I would have to like take my headphones off immediately because I'd, you know, had everything cranked up because they were, you know, did you hear that? You know, or whatever. And then they'd cut and they'd all start yelling and talking, and I'd be like, oh, it would blow me up.
That's crazy. Now, you were the mixer on that. Did you just mix, or did you have a boom op too?
I did not have a boom op for that. That was another one-man band. There's only one movie that I really had a boom op for, and that was Grace, which you might see on my thing. I did have a boom op for that one, and that was nice. But I have to admit, I really enjoy booming. Running a boom pole is probably my favorite part of the job, and I'm hoping to do more of that. Also, I don't really want to spend another $100,000 on more gear, which is apparently what, if you want to be a mixer, what you will end up spending based on several of the other mixers I know in this area.
Right, right. So tell us a little bit about the setup you did for The Witch in the Window.
So I basically had my 633 in the bag. I think back then I was still using that smaller bag I mentioned. I'm trying to remember. I don't know how many Lectros I don't think I had the SRC then. So it was back then. It was probably the one Lectro channel, because I've had that one for a while, and then the rest were probably Sennheiser G3s, which is what I used to use.
And any particular challenges you had other than the whispering?
I remember that there was a crazy swing in temperature that was was tricky for me. I went home on the first weekend because the first week I was there, we were doing all overnights, and it was freezing cold, and I hadn't brought enough warm clothes. And so I went home and then switched and brought some warmer clothes. And then when I came back, we switched to days, and then there was this massive heat wave, and I had like no pairs of shorts. So that was probably the most difficult part of that shoot. If I recall, the only issue I've had, and I was very sad, I used to have the Schoeps CMIT 5. I love that shotgun mic. But I had problems on that shoot because it was humid, and that mic really does not like humidity. And that's actually probably the biggest reason I switched to the Super CMIT, because I looked at reviews, and although I also really like the idea that it has the noise canceling built into it, I read online that it gets hot. And I was like, oh, I bet that protects it from moisture a little bit. And so far, that has been the case.
Okay. Now, I saw another movie on here. We're taking it back a few years, and it was called Chainsaw Maidens from Hell.
That was one of the first features that I mixed after getting out of school. I'd pretty much just gotten out, just graduated from grad school. But that's an interesting one, and I did want to talk about, because I also do lighting as well as sound. I'd say I'm like 90% sound and 10% lighting work. But that movie, I actually was the gaffer and the sound mixer for that movie, which I don't recommend. So that was a very difficult challenge, was trying to basically run two departments at once.
Now, how did you get your experience as a gaffer?
Well, I know you've asked people before about understanding other departments on set and how that kind of gives you an edge. And I thought we might get into that at some point, and because I'd been thinking about, does that really, like, how much does that help you as a sound guy to also do lighting and so you understand that? And I think it definitely gave me an advantage in the beginning, knowing when I'm going to make a shadow or it's going to be a problem with the boom or something like that. I think eventually you get that knowledge either way, but it certainly was helpful starting out that I had the knowledge of lighting. And now I also know when the DP doesn't know what they're doing. If I see them placing like hard lights right by the camera and it's going to throw shadows, and you see that, it's going to be a nightmare for you as the sound person, but you also know that probably that DP is not very good, so you don't have to worry about people hearing your bad work, because probably if that DP's doing it, that's not going to go anywhere. But anyway, I think it was a bit of luck. I had an excellent teacher at Boston University. He just retired, but he was also the president of the union here. And he was just a really great lighting teacher who had a great way of kind of getting you to understand the fundamentals. If any of the listeners are interested in learning more about lighting and they really want to get into it, there's a book I would recommend. It's considered the Bible for lighting, and it was the textbook for that class, and it's called the Set Lighting Technician's Handbook. And it pretty much goes over everything. It obviously goes into a lot more depth of what you would need to know as a sound guy, just trying to not make shadows on people's faces or the wall behind them. But it's not like a crazy expensive book. So, and if you're thinking of also doing lighting like I do, then I'd say it'd be worth a worthy purchase. But again, don't do it don't do both at the same time.
Okay. Now, tell us about Sound Team 6.
I don't remember exactly how I came up with that. It just sort of I don't remember why I was even thinking about a name, but I was doing sound for a thesis film in school, and I was there with a friend of mine. We were both working on sound. I was like, wow, this is rare that there's, two people on a student film for sound. Normally, lucky if you get one. And I was just chatting with him, and I remember saying the name, and I was like, oh, that has a nice ring to it. And at first, I hadn't even made that connection with SEAL Team 6. I think I realized it like a week later. I was like, oh, that's why it has a ring to it, because I'm thinking of SEAL Team 6. And I was like, you know what, though? Like, I kind of like what that implies, that and I always strive to, be the best at whatever I'm doing. And I was like, I feel like that's a good name. It implies that we're the best. And, if I'm not the best, at least I'm striving to get there. And so in a way, it inspires me, and I hope it communicates that to clients.
That's good. I like that. Now, you in the past, you worked for a company called Octav. So tell us what that is about.
Octav is run by Michael Jolly, and sadly, he is actually just shut down, so he's not doing it anymore. But basically, it started with you would send him Octav microphones. They're a Russian manufacturer of microphones, and sound people discovered them. It was right when I was in undergrad, I think in 90, I think it was the mid 90s or so when they started getting discovered that they were actually really good microphones. The story I heard about those was that communism, they had the factory cranking out mics, no one was buying them, and they were just building up in warehouses, just sitting around. And this British guy just found them, and he's like, gee, these microphones are actually pretty good, and they're really cheap. But anyway, Michael found after working with them that he could improve them with, not spending a ton more money and make them even better, as good as some of the more well-known microphones like the Neumanns mostly. He tended to compare his mics to those. So he ended up expanding into a bunch of other ones. So he would take MXL mics and a lot of the other cheap Chinese mics and do upgrades to them. And I had a couple of Octav mics that I bought back when I was in school, and everyone was raving about them. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. This guy is doing these mods. I was like, I should do that. And I sent him a mic, and when I went to send it to him, I discovered that his shop was 5 miles from my house. And I was like, wow, I had no idea. And it turns out he had just moved here to Cape Cod, where I live, maybe 6 months before that. And I just kind of said, hey, I'd love to work for you. I'm like a decent solderer. I'm assuming there's some soldering involved if you're replacing electronic parts. And eventually I did end up working for him. I worked for him for about 2 years.
Okay. Well, tell us about the Octava mic, and would you use that mic on set?
When I was starting out, I did use the Octava mic. That was my first mic. Actually, it was great, to be honest. So I actually had a pair of the MC012 microphones and they come with different capsules. So it has a hypercardioid, a cardioid, and an omni. So I had 2 of those, each with the various capsules, and then I had them upgraded, and they were great. I probably used those. So for Become God and Chainsaw Maidens and District C11, probably was using the Octava for all 3 of those. And I have to say, I would definitely recommend that mic if you're just starting out. I know a lot of people recommend all kinds of different mics, but I find maybe it's because I worked there, and Michael certainly was opinionated about a lot of the Chinese manufacturers, and even, and I'm not going to name names, but some of the mics that he would modify, and I have to say a lot of them are very bright sounding, and I like the Octava because it wasn't like that. So I thought it was really a great mic for inside use. I'd say very close to the Schoeps, and a quarter of the cost, but a quarter of the cost. So.
Okay. Yeah, I had heard about them years ago, and every now and then I would ask somebody, and some people had heard about them, some people haven't. But you actually worked at the place where they were modifying them, so that's amazing. How do you get a good set of mics like that without getting, say, taken advantage of? Where do you buy them?
There are a few dealers that are legit, and I don't know off the top of my head. I mean, I don't think Michael is a dealer anymore because he's kind of shut down. He's moved on to this other project, which I think is cool, but it's not really related to sound things. So I would probably avoid, and I don't think you can get Octavas at like Musician's Friend or those kind of places, but they do have dealers. There are online places. All I know is Octavamod was a dealer. Basically, you'd buy them and he'd pre-modify them. You just got the mic. So he would open it up the box, do the modification, and then send it out. But I know there are a couple other dealers around the United States where you can order those. And I know there are fakes out there. I heard about that. I know there's like ways to tell. I don't remember off the top of my head what they are, but I'm sure if you can do a little research and find out.
Tell us about your worst on-set experience.
So there was actually a pair of horror movies that were filmed back to back. So it was the same director, same production team, and same crew, but totally different two totally different stories, different actors. And the first one we had 14 days to shoot, and the second one we had 11 days to shoot. So this is 2 feature films. I'd say typically since then I've had that much time for 1 feature film. This was 2. And I just remember the first film was an ensemble cast. I think there was like 7 main characters. It was mostly one location, so that was fine. But there was quite a bit of action. We had we had a scene where they like blew out a window, and we had blank firing guns on set. A lot of action stuff and stunts. And I just remember thinking how are we going to do all this in this amount of time? Well, we didn't. Basically, every day when we didn't make the day, they would just tack on all the scenes to the next day until, I want to say on day 5 or so, they sent out a call sheet that had 23 and 5/8 pages that we were supposed to shoot that day. And then we got to the last day of that shoot, and we got to 12, and I remember the second AD came up to me and he's like, look, we're gonna just keep going until we can't go anymore. How much money do you want? And I was like, I guess, double time after 12. And he was like, okay. And I went 23 hours.
Oh.
We started at 10 a.m. and then we finished at 9 a.m. the next day. And I remember previously what would happen was he'd want to keep going every day, but the sun would come up, and it was basically we were doing a lot of, I think almost the whole movie was overnights. And the sun would come up, and we got to stop. You could tell everyone in the crew was like, oh, I'm so glad the sun came up because we're so done, we're so tired. And I remember we were shooting outside, and I was like, okay, well, we're going to keep going, but we'll have to be done when the sun comes up. We're outside. Well, we finished that scene, and then he's like, all right, let's go inside. And I was like, okay. And I saw the guy start blacking out windows, and I was like, okay, we're just going to keep going. There's nothing to stop us now. But, and I don't think we ever got 100% of what we were supposed to shoot on that, but, the actors had planes to catch, so we had to be done. And I don't know if that movie's ever come out.
Sounds like a fun one.
Yeah, I think what saved me on that was there were some really good people on the crew, and we had fun hanging out. I knew a lot of the guys that were doing the electric crew on that, and they were a help too. The electric guys are always tough. They won't take any guff. I know there was a time where the camera team packed up all the cameras and stuff inside the truck because we hadn't been paid yet, and they were worried that we weren't going to. And so they said, we're not taking the camera stuff off the truck until we have paychecks in our hands. And that happened. We got those paychecks in our hands.
All right. Have you ever forgotten any equipment on your way to an audio job?
Yes, I think someone else told you this too. I forgot the boom pole. Yep. I think it was, I don't remember what shoot it was. It was very early on, and I forgot the boom pole. I had to call home and wake up my wife because we started pretty early in the morning. And I said, hey, can you go downstairs and grab that and jump in the car, and I'm going to come meet you halfway. And so we did that. We met up, halfway between home and the shoot, and she handed it over, and she's like, you need a checklist or something, buddy. And I was like, yeah, I know. And then I ran back to set, got back just in time. I think they were just finishing up the setup, ready to go for that first shot. And I basically jumped out of the car and ran up and was like, ready.
Oh, that's great. All right. So what Expendables do you like to use when you're miking up talent?
So being on Nosferatu was actually a really good opportunity because I got to try out a lot of new things because I sort of, I developed my own a few things that I like. But I have to say, I really just keep coming back to RM11 with some top stick. I don't know. They just work. I don't have as many issues with rustling. I know some of the other people have said, the Ursa tape, which is really nice, or, moleskin. And I've certainly done that. There are times when it can work, but the RM11 almost always seems to work best for me. I'm just prepped with that. I got a bunch of them. I get the top stick that comes in the 1-inch strips, and then I cut them in fourths. And then actually on this one, the mixer said, oh, you fold it in half, even one more time. So you take that little square and then fold it in half. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And then, you can leave it on the little one side of the label on to keep it until the last minute. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I've been trying that, and I don't know. I like that. It keeps the sticky part away from the head of the mic. So you got a very small little sticky patch on the back of the RM11. And that seems to work really well. There was one interesting thing. I guess I actually took over for a different utility who did the first few episodes of the show, and then I came on and finished out the rest of the season. And he really liked to use bunion pads. It's like Dr. Scholl's things that you get at CVS. So if you cut them in half, it's sort of like a pre-made moleskin. It almost looks like a moleskin RM11 if you cut one of those in half. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. I didn't have as good luck with those as I do with the RM11s, but they're so fast because it's just one piece. It's already sticky. It's got a little backing paper on it. If you cut them, you just have to cut them up a little. And so those are really cool. And that was something that I was like, wow, I never really thought of using something like that.
Any other products you like to use when miking?
I sometimes use vampire clips. I've kind of gotten away from those a little bit. They break all the time and they're expensive. They just seem like way more expensive than they should be for a little piece of plastic with 2 pins sticking out of it. They're like $25 each. And I've had a lot of actors accidentally poke themselves with it because even when I tell them, let me take it off, don't touch it because I don't want you to get hurt, then they forget or they don't listen to me. And sometimes if I really need to be fast and they've got a loose like polo shirt on where it's really easy to just clip that right at the V, I might do it. But I don't think I used a V clip once on Nosferatu. Over 3 months, never used one of them. We had them.
Talk a little bit about what kind of rates get charged in Massachusetts, say, for being a location sound mixer. So just give us a range. You don't have to get real specific. But.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't want to get too specific. I mean, I know the standard rate is somewhere around like 600 for 10 hours or so. That's like commercial and stuff like that. And then your gear is on top of that. And I think it depends on how much gear you have for that part. But usually, like a couple $100 more a day for your gear. Obviously, it can be less than that if it's like, if it's a half day or if it's people you know. But in general, we try not to let any producers get away with paying less than what the union is telling us we should charge. So. And that's kind of something I'm getting used to, which is really nice, is that the union has kind of set like, here's what you should be paid. And everyone just kind of agrees on that and you don't have to negotiate. And I really like that aspect of it.
All right. Now, do you use any kind of freelance services like Production Hub or Staff Me Up or any of those sites?
So I've been using Staff Me Up for a while. I don't pay for it. I've just been using the free version, and I think I don't know if they've kind of changed or they're pressuring people to only accept applications with the full cover letter, because I have not gotten any gigs from that in the last year or so. I got a few gigs from it early on, and then lately I haven't really been getting any from there. And I don't know if that's because I'm not paying for it, but there's so many websites. I just didn't want to like be paying them all $10 a month when, most of them I can see how many jobs are on there. We do have up here kind of an old school service, which I used for a while, called Central Booking. And there's actually a guy, he has an office at one of the rental houses, and you can sign up with him, and he's more expensive. I think he was like $70 a month, but I was getting pretty regular gigs from him. So I don't know if there are people in other markets that have a service like that, but we have one up here and it works pretty well.
All right. Now, if you could go back in time and tell yourself or give yourself some advice about production sound, what would you tell yourself?
That's tough. Honestly, like I feel like I don't have any big regrets, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I can't think of anything where I was like, gee, I really wish I would have done that instead. I guess maybe one thing I would say is believe in your skills. I know there's probably a lot of imposter syndrome out there. I know it's hard because, at least for me, there wasn't a lot of interaction with other sound people. In the beginning, it was, it's all like one-man band, so I'm always the only sound guy on set. It took a while for me to meet other sound people because I'm always just getting hired to work by myself. More than maybe any other department, there's not as much of a team until you get onto the bigger stuff. And so I just say, make sure to stick up for yourself. Don't work for too little money. You'll probably have to do that in the beginning. But I think once you start getting established, you should make sure to push for getting what you're worth. And I'd say definitely try to reach out to the other sound mixers in the area, because honestly, you shouldn't think of the other sound people as your competition. You should think of them as your contacts, because at least in this area, we all know each other, and we'll certainly, if we can't do a gig, we'll refer the people who we like and trust for those gigs. And I think that does as much for your reputation. If you have a list of people you can recommend who are good, producers are going to say, okay, we wanted this guy, but the guy he found was also really good. This guy knows good people. We're going to go to him first again next time. And so I think even if you can't do a job, if you can refer someone who's really good, that's going to reflect well on you as well. And I think everyone will help each other.
All right. Well, as we kind of start to wrap things up, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So best way to get in touch with me is at my website, soundteam6.com. And my email and phone are there. And you can also, I just started a new Instagram for the business, which is also at soundteam6.
All right, great. I want to say thanks to Jack Garrett for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you. This was really, really fun. Thank you for having me on.
And a big thanks to all of our listeners out there. If you'd like us to discuss a particular topic, please send us an email at locationsoundpodcast@gmail.com. We would love for you to subscribe and leave us a comment. We're available on Apple Podcast, and for Android users, check out Google Podcast. Also, we're on Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, and on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, remember, sound is half the picture.